He took to the stage for a 2-hour speech, which many say sets the stage for his big return. At the exact same spot where he launched his presidential bid back in 2002, Brazil's former leader Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva took aim at the policies and the COVID-19 response of Jair Bolsonaro, the man he's rumoured to be eager to unseat.
Este país não tem governo. Este país não cuida da economia. Este país não cuida do emprego. Este país não cuida do salário. Este país não cuida da saúde.
This was Lula's first address since a judge at this building, the Supreme Court in Brasilia, quashed his corruption convictions earlier this week. Lula's supporters were out to trumpet his innocence, but the current president said the court should rethink its decision, adding that the leftist administration was nothing other than a catastrophe. The case against Lula was dismissed on a technicality, meaning that he can run for office now once again, should he wish to.
Que a minha cabeça não tem tempo para pensar em candidatura em 2022. Quando chegar o momento de discutir em 2022, nós vamos ter imenso prazer de anunciar ao Brasil que nós estamos pensando em 2022.
Some, though, are already looking into Brazil's political crystal ball. A new opinion poll suggests that Lula and his arch-rival Bolsonaro would have the support needed to reach a second-round face-off at next year's ballot.
All right, I'm now joined by Glenn Greenwald, who is the author of Securing Democracy, My Fight for Press Freedom and Justice in Bolsonaro's Brazil. Thank you for coming on, Glenn.
Hey, thanks for inviting me back, Ben. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, so I was hoping that you could, so I've been reading your book, which is extremely interesting, and I was hoping that we could start out with a little bit of of background of the kind that you give in the book about, Brazil's history, and in particular, what it is about Lula da Silva, who is not like a revolutionary communist or anything by any means, who is like a center left, kind of social democratic president that outraged both the Brazilian right and the United States enough to explain everything that happened since.
Sure. So first of all, Brazil is an incredibly important country geopolitically. It's the 6th largest country in the world from the perspective of population. It's almost as large physically as the United States. It's the 2nd largest country in the hemisphere, which makes it of great importance to the United States, which continues to embrace the Monroe Doctrine that says that it and it alone has the right to interfere in its backyard, which is how it thinks about Latin America. And the history of Brazil is crucial for understanding both Lula and Bolsonaro in the current moment, in part because Brazil was the last country to eliminate slavery, which means that it was 1888 thereabouts. And, I mentioned in the book that there are these two kind of catchphrases that capture the essence of Brazil, both sides. One is God is Brazilian, which is intended to signify that it's a country that is endowed with extraordinary resources, natural resources, beauty, physical beauty, the beauty of its people, the uniqueness of its culture. But then the other one is Brazil is always the country of the future, meaning people always said, oh, Brazil's moment is arriving, and yet never seems to arrive. So its potential has never been able to be fulfilled. And a big reason for that is because of this immense wealth inequality and income inequality that makes the U.S. look almost socialist by comparison. And so the most important historical event to know about Brazil is that in 1963, it had a center-left government that was a burgeoning democracy. It was steadfastly neutral in the Cold War between Moscow and Washington. But it really wasn't good enough for the Kennedy administration. And then for the Johnson administration, they perceived that the center-left government was becoming too socialist just because of some land reforms, some nationalization of private assets, and first threatened the Brazilian government to stop. And when the elected president didn't, it conspired with Brazilian generals to overthrow that government within a day, threatened them, and troops marched on the presidential palace. He fled to Uruguay. And for the next 21 years, a military dictatorship, very vicious and brutal and savage, ruled Brazil by, ushering standard dictatorship orders, killing dissidents, imprisoning journalists, exiling artists, the whole litany of standard dictatorial attributes. And so Brazil finally redemocratized in 1985 because of popular protest. And Lula was always this kind of gigantic figure from redemocratization. He was somebody who was the kind of person who never wields power in Brazil. He was the seventh of eight children. He was illiterate until he was 10 years old. He worked in a factory and lost a finger, his pinky finger, on his left hand, and became this labor leader, this extremely charismatic labor leader, formed the Workers' Party and ran for Congress, got a huge vote, was in Congress, and then 3 times ran for president and almost won, but each time lost to a kind of center-right neoliberal establishment figure because of this perception that they were deliberately cultivating that he was too far leftist, that he was more like Chavez or Castro or these old-style communists, and that would scare away international capital and would crush civil liberties. And so finally in 2002, his 4th time running, he got tired of losing. He made a lot of compromises to kind of the bourgeois class and the oligarchical class. He chose as his vice president this businessman, multimillionaire, textile owner who was very friendly with the banks. And his presidency was this immense success. He governed from 2002, got reelected overwhelmingly in 2006, and then left office in 2010 with an 87% approval rating. 87% approval rating in a democratic country. It's almost unheard of. Brazil's economy grew massively. The rich did well, but he also lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty. That was when Brazil got the Olympics and the World Cup, the first South American country ever to get the Olympics and to host the World Cup. So it looked like Brazil's, fulfillment potential was finally being fulfilled. And then his handpicked successor was Dilma Rousseff. I do want to talk about Dilma, but I do want to just back up a little bit because just to underline the point about how Lula was actually governing as a fairly incremental kind of left reformist. Your husband David Miranda is a congressman, is a member of a party that's to the left of Lula and Dilma's party. Yeah, it's an important point. Just as kind of the oligarchical class in Brazil and international capital feared that Lula was going to be far left and was relieved that he wasn't. Obviously, the actual left in Brazil was disappointed. They too thought he would be and wasn't. And so a component of his Workers' Party broke off, in part because there were corruption scandals, but more so because of these neoliberal concessions that he was making. And there were several parties. The largest one is my husband's party, which is a socialist party. And that was the interesting thing about Lula, was he always said, he wrote a famous letter to the Brazilian people in 2002, basically promising, look, I'm not a communist. I'm not like Castro. I'm not like Chavez. I believe in civil liberties. I believe that the market needs to be used to help the poor, and whether politically as a strategy or out of conviction, that is how he governed. The rich did very well under Lula, but so did the poor. Everybody did well, which is how you leave office with an 87% approval rating, with the approval of the World Bank and the Economist and, sort of the entire world economic order. So it was really an extraordinary presidency in its ability to kind of check all the boxes. But you're right, the left was not so enamored of his presidency.
Yeah, which I think might be an important point to make, just because I think it maybe underscores what if you are in what American politicians sometimes call America's backyard, and also you're in this country that of course has this very powerful and vicious domestic right-wing oligarchy, how little it can take to infuriate those forces. So can you give us a little bit of a sense of the kind of policies that Lula was implementing that had these effects of poverty reduction and everything you're talking about?
Sure. So one of the kind of iconic programs, anti-poverty programs that to this day is held up as a model by institutions like the World Bank and the IMF and The Economist magazine, those kind of organs, is called Bolsa Familia, which means essentially family purse in English. It's not a great translation. And the idea of it is the government pays single mothers a monthly payment for raising their children. And in exchange, what's required is that she show proof of vaccination, healthcare, and school attendance. So it's basically a contract between the government and citizens in need, where the government provides sustenance. And then at the same time, the parents have a responsibility to show that they're parenting in a way that will make the children on the right path constructively for the society. He, created all kinds of programs to enable people who never dreamt of being able to send their kids to go to college, of having huge scholarships. It really created, for the first time ever, a middle class in Brazil, which never existed. And it's really interesting. I asked when I interviewed Lula twice. The last time was in 2019 when he was still in prison, and he was, kept saying, "I'm in prison because I was going to run for president again," which we'll get to. And the rich people and the elites didn't want me to, and that's why I'm here. And I asked him, I said, "But that makes no sense to me. The rich did really well under your presidency. They got richer. Why would they be so opposed to your coming back?" And he said, "It's not economics that is driving their resentment. It's culture, that they would go to the airports and for the first time see a bunch of people who lived in the favela being able to fly. And they would start saying, wow, our airports now look like bus stations." Or they would go to their shopping malls and have to see Black people and poor people who they had never seen before now able to kind of, have consumer power. And it was really a cultural resentment that he said is driving the animus toward him, as opposed to purely an economic one.
Eu sabia que estava sendo jogado jogo. E eu sabia que o jogo era evitar que o Lula pudesse disputar as eleições. Por quê? Porque era tudo que a elite brasileira não queria, era que o Lula voltasse a ser presidente da República. Por quê? Se eles ganharam muito dinheiro no meu governo, se eles ficaram mais ricos no meu governo.
Mas não era verdade que, por exemplo, o lucro dos bancos explodiu durante sua presidência?
Eu não sei se explodiu, mas cresceu bem.
Cresceu muito, não?
Mas a verdade é que as pessoas mais pobres subiram um degrau
também
na escala social. E na medida que os mais pobres começaram a entrar em universidade, na medida que começaram a frequentar teatro, na medida que começaram a frequentar restaurante, na medida que começaram a frequentar aeroporto, isso começou a incomodar uma parte da elite brasileira.
Mas, presidente, a situação da classe mais rica melhorou bastante também durante seu governo. Então, por que você acredita que essa classe que melhorou muito, que recebeu muito lucros durante seu governo, é contra seu voto?
É que não é só uma questão econômica, é uma questão cultural. É importante lembrar que esse país faz pouco mais de 100 anos que acabou com a escravidão na lei, mas a escravidão continua na cabeça das pessoas. É por isso que quem é vitimado, pela polícia são os negros mais pobres. É por isso que os negros ganham metade do branco, é por isso que a mulher negra ganha menos que a mulher branca, é por isso que é o negro que tem menos escolaridade. Por quê? Porque você tem na consciência das pessoas o escravismo ainda preponderante. É uma coisa grave, mas ela é verdadeira. Isso não termina logo. Então, o que eu acho é que não é uma questão econômica, é uma questão cultural, é uma questão política, é uma questão sociológica.
Mas vamos falar sobre essas questões.
Yeah, and I think also on the U.S. side, I mean, somewhat like the coup in the 60s you referred to earlier, it seems like part of what Lula did that incited the anger of the United States was just being too independent in his foreign policy.
Yeah, it's an important point. First of all, I think we have to, point out that Brazil obviously has the Amazon, which is an incredibly important asset for the earth, both environmentally, but also in terms of how it can be exploited. But it also has enormous petroleum reserves, and specifically what are called pre-salt petroleum reserves that are older and more difficult to extract, but enormous volume at a time when the world's oil reserves are being depleted. And Petrobras was, one of the targets of NSA spying, as we reported during Snowden. So the U.S. has a big interest in Brazil and always has. And one of the things that Lula did that really angered the United States more than anything was it wasn't so much the domestic reforms, which they could live with. It was, as you said, foreign policy. And in particular, at a time when the Obama administration was trying very hard to isolate Iran and was trying to negotiate a very aggressive deal with Iran, Lula and Erdogan of Turkey were concerned that this is going to lead to war. And so they went off on their own. And you see the picture there with Ahmadinejad and created their own agreement to kind of reintegrate Iran back into the international order in a way that the United States was utterly opposed to. And you can go find columns from like Tom Friedman and David Ignatius and all their foreign policy community sources, CIA sources who are, savaging Lula as some kind of monster because he had the audacity to forge an independent foreign policy that was contrary to what the U.S. was ordering. It was a real clarifying moment for me to see that. So I wouldn't say that the U.S. under Obama hated Lula, but definitely for the foreign policy community, they started realizing that we cannot afford an independent themselves too far away from our sphere of influence because Brazil is by far the most influential country in that region.
Yeah. So, although actually Obama famously in his memoir does slam Lula a couple times. I think he refers to him as being like a Tammany Hall boss, which of course gets us into the meat of the book.